The gleaming hallways of the stellar horizons reflected Kira Jensen's nervous excitement as she followed First Officer Angstvar through the ship's cargo division. Her boots, worn from years of earthbound freight work, seemed almost out of place against the pristine metallic floor. Yet here she was, the first human cargo specialist ever hired by the Galactic Transport Consortium. "Your credentials from Earth's Singapore Mass Freight Authority are impressive," Angstvar said, their crystalline body structure catching the light as they walked. Though I must admit, some crew members questioned the wisdom of bringing aboard a specialist from a Level 3 civilization. Kira smiled diplomatically. She'd heard similar doubts throughout her career, especially since humanity had joined the galactic community just 15 years ago. "Sometimes older methods have their advantages," she replied, keeping pace with Angstvar's long strides. The cargo bay doors parted with a soft hiss, revealing a vast chamber filled with containers of various sizes and compositions. Some pulsed with biocontainment fields, others remained perfectly still in null-gravity pods. The sight reminded her of Singapore's massive ports, just on a far grander scale. "This will be your primary workspace," Angstvar explained, gesturing with one of their 4 upper appendages. "You'll be working under Cargo Master Zathor. They have over 3 centuries of experience in interstellar freight management." As if on cue, a tall, serpentine figure emerged from behind a row of containers. Zathor's scales shifted through various shades of blue as they approached, a sign Kira had learned indicated curiosity among the Serpengsi species. "So, this is our human specialist." Zathor's voice resonated with a musical quality. "Welcome aboard, Jensen Handler. I trust you've been briefed on our current manifest." Before Kira could respond, an alarm blared through the cargo bay. Zathor's scales instantly shifted to a deep purple. "Containment breach in Section 7. They announced, already moving with surprising speed toward the far end of the bay. Kira followed instinctively, her years of emergency response training kicking in. They rounded a corner to find a cluster of containers exhibiting strange behavior. The supposedly inert cargo was somehow interacting with its containment fields, creating unpredictable energy fluctuations. "Impossible," Zathor muttered, their fingers dancing across a holographic control panel. "These are standard mineral samples from the Proxima mines. They should be completely stable." Kira studied the containers, noting something familiar about the pattern of disturbance. It reminded her of something she'd seen during her years handling dangerous goods in Earth's ports. "Those energy readings," she said, pointing to the diagnostic display. "They're not random. There's a resonance pattern forming between the containers." Zathor's scales rippled with skepticism. "The minerals are inert. They cannot generate resonance patterns." "Not individually," Kira agreed, moving closer to examine the arrangement of the containers. "But look at how they're stacked. On Earth, we discovered certain crystalline structures can develop sympathetic vibrations when arranged in specific geometric patterns, especially under pressure." She pulled up the cargo manifest on her datapad, quickly scanning through the mineral compositions. These samples contain traces of piezoelectric materials. The standard containment fields are creating micropressures that, in this specific arrangement, are causing a cascade effect. Zathor's scales shifted to a thoughtful green. "But our systems should have detected such interactions." "They would if they were looking for them," Kira explained. "But this is an emergent property, something that only appears when multiple factors align in just the right way. We discovered it on Earth after a similar incident with quartz shipments." Without waiting for permission, Kira began redirecting the cargo drones to break up the geometric pattern. Within minutes, the energy fluctuations stabilized, and the alarm fell silent. Zathor observed the readings with all 4 eyes wide open. "Fascinating. In 3 centuries of cargo management, I've never encountered this phenomenon." They turned to Kira, scales now showing bands of respectful gold. "Perhaps there is something to be said for perspectives from younger civilizations." Angstvar, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. "It seems our decision to bring you aboard was more prescient than we realized, Jensen Handler." Though I suspect this won't be the last surprise our cargo holds for us. Kira nodded, already making notes about updating the cargo arrangement protocols. She had a feeling her human insight would be needed again soon, and despite the lingering doubts of some crew members, she was ready to prove that sometimes the oldest solutions could solve the newest problems. As she helped Zathor implement the new stacking procedures, Kira couldn't help but smile. Her first day on the stellar horizons had certainly been eventful, but it had also confirmed what she'd always believed, that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in its technology, but in its ability to see patterns where others saw only chaos. 3 weeks into her position aboard the stellar horizons, Kira found herself facing a far more complex challenge than resonating minerals. Storage units across multiple decks had begun experiencing systematic failures, and no one could determine why. Another containment breach in Sector 12, reported Lieutenant Vex, their bioluminescent tendrils pulsing with anxiety. That's the 7th one this shift. Zathor's scales had maintained a steady gray of concern for the past hour as they reviewed the mounting incidents. The pattern makes no sense. We're seeing failures in completely unrelated cargo types, with different containment protocols stored in separate sections. Kira stood before the master control panel, where a holographic display showed the location of each breach. She'd been studying the representation for hours, certain there was something familiar about the progression of failures, but unable to put her finger on it. "Show me the timeline again," she requested, rubbing her tired eyes. "But this time, let's view it from above, with all decks overlaid." The hologram shifted, presenting a top-down view of the massive cargo holds. As the timeline played, red dots appeared indicating each failure point. Kira leaned forward, her exhaustion forgotten as recognition sparked in her mind. "Hold on," she said, gesturing for the replay to stop. "Can you overlay the ship's power distribution network?" Zathor complied, and a web of energy conduits appeared in blue lines across the display. Kira's heart rate quickened as her suspicion was confirmed. "There," she pointed to where the failures clustered around major power junctions. "It's following the electrical pathways, but not directly. It's like watching water flow around rocks in a stream." "Impossible," Vex interjected. "Our power grid is completely isolated from the cargo containment systems. There can't be any interference." "Not electrical interference," Kira agreed, her mind racing back to her studies of historical shipping disasters. "But what about electromagnetic fields? The ship's power grid creates them naturally, and they'd be strongest at these junctions." Zathor's scales flickered with sudden understanding. "The new Centaurian pulse drives. We installed them last month." "Exactly." Kira expanded the hologram, highlighting the engine sections. "They're more efficient than the old ones, but they also generate a different type of field. On Earth, we learned the hard way that sometimes new technology can have unexpected ripple effects on cargo systems that worked perfectly fine before." She manipulated the display, overlaying the ship's electromagnetic field map. The pattern of failures almost perfectly matched the areas where the fields were most intense. The containment systems were designed to account for the old drive's field patterns, she explained. But these new ones produce harmonics that create weak points, like pressure zones in an ocean current. The cargo failures aren't random. They're following the path of least resistance through these electromagnetic eddies. Zathor's scales shifted to deep purple, their color of intense concentration. "But why didn't our diagnostics detect this?" "Because they were looking for direct interference," Kira said, remembering similar incidents from Earth's maritime history. "This is more subtle. It's like how early sea captains learned to read weather patterns by watching how waves behaved. Sometimes the real problem isn't visible until you step back and look at the whole picture." "A fascinating analogy," came a new voice. Captain Ixel had entered the control room silently, their crystalline form refracting the hologram's light. "But how do we solve it?" Kira straightened, aware of all eyes on her. "We need to think of the cargo holds like ocean currents. We can't stop the electromagnetic fields, but we can map them and arrange our cargo to work with them," instead of against them. She began manipulating the holographic display, creating a new organizational schema. C. By placing the most sensitive cargo in these calm zones and using more robust containers as buffers in the high-intensity areas, we can create safe channels through the electromagnetic currents. It would require completely reorganizing our cargo protocols, Zathor noted, but their scales were already shifting to the goal of approval. Sometimes the best solutions come from understanding natural patterns, Kira said, thinking of how ancient sailors had learned to use trade winds to their advantage. The principles that guided ships on Earth's oceans still apply among the stars. We just need to learn to read the new currents. Captain Ixel moved closer to study the proposed arrangement. The computational requirements to map these patterns and maintain safe zones would be significant. Actually, Kira said with a slight smile, we might not need complex computations. On Earth, we developed simple visual indicators for dangerous electromagnetic zones in shipping. We could adapt that system here, make it intuitive enough that any crew member could spot potential problem areas at a glance. The captain's crystalline form sparkled with interest. Like your ancient lighthouse systems. Similar principle, yes. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most reliable. Over the next several hours, Kira worked with Zathor and the engineering team to implement her suggested changes. They installed basic field strength indicators throughout the cargo holds and began the careful process of reorganizing containers according to the new maritime protocols. As she watched the last of the warning indicators go online, Kira felt a familiar satisfaction. The solution hadn't required advanced technology or complex algorithms, just the ability to recognize patterns and apply age-old principles to new problems. You know, Zathor said, their scales now a contented blue. I'm beginning to understand why the consortium wanted a human perspective on this ship. Your species has a remarkable way of finding clarity in chaos. Kira nodded, but her attention was already drawn to another anomaly in the cargo manifest. Something about the latest shipment of biological samples didn't quite add up, and she had a feeling their adventures in problem-solving were far from over. The biological containment alert blared through the stellar horizons with an urgency that made Kira's skin crawl. She sprinted alongside Zathor toward Cargo Bay 9, where the latest crisis was unfolding. Tell me exactly what we're dealing with, she called out as they ran. Xenoform spores, Zathor replied, scales flickering between purple anxiety and red alarm. Class 4 biosamples from the Rigel research stations. They were perfectly stable until an hour ago. They burst into the cargo bay to find a scene of controlled chaos. The containment field around a cluster of storage units rippled with unstable energy, while inside, dozens of specimen containers pulsed with an ominous green glow. Status report, Zathor demanded. Lieutenant Vex's tendrils were practically tied in knots as they monitored the readings. The spores are somehow reacting to each other, temperature rising, pressure increasing in all containers. At this rate, we have maybe 2 hours before complete containment failure. Kira studied the emergency readouts. Something about the spore's behavior tickled at her memory. Show me the exact arrangement of these containers before the reaction started. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the previous configuration. Kira's eyes widened as she noticed something familiar. These spores, they're exhibiting colony behavior, she said, remembering her studies of Earth's most aggressive invasive species. Look at the activation pattern. It's almost exactly like how fire ants respond when their nests are threatened. These are individual research specimens, Captain Ixel stated, entering the bay. They shouldn't be capable of colony-level responses. Unless they don't know that, Kira said, an idea forming. On Earth, we discovered that certain colonial organisms can maintain quantum-level connections even when physically separated. What if these spores are doing the same thing? Zathor's scales shifted to thoughtful green. The containment fields, they're designed to isolate each specimen completely. Exactly. Kira moved to the control panel. But what if that's actually making things worse? By trying to isolate them, We might be triggering some kind of survival response, like how a separated ant colony will become more aggressive trying to reunite. Are you suggesting we remove the containment fields? Vex asked, tendrils whipping in alarm. That would be catastrophic. No, not remove them, Kira said, her fingers flying over the controls. But maybe we can modify them to create the illusion of connection while maintaining actual isolation. Like creating a virtual colony. Captain Ixel's crystalline form sparkled with interest. Explain. On Earth, we learn to manage invasive species by manipulating their natural behaviors instead of fighting them directly. Kira pulled up the containment field specifications. If we can synchronize the field frequencies to match the spore's quantum signatures, we might be able to trick them into thinking they're still part of the same colony. The computational power required to maintain such precise field synchronization, Zathor began, would be massive, Kira agreed. But we don't need it to be perfect. We just need to convince them they're not alone long enough to get them to a proper research facility. The captain studied the proposed modifications. The risk is significant. If we're wrong, the spores will breach containment anyway, Kira finished. At least this gives us a chance. After a moment of tense consideration, Captain Ixel nodded. Proceed. Kira worked with the engineering team to modify the containment fields, carefully adjusting the frequencies to match the quantum signatures they detected from the spores. It was delicate work, like trying to tune multiple radio stations to the exact same frequency without letting them bleed into each other. Ready for first test, she announced, her hand hovering over the activation control. Beginning field synchronization in 3, 2, 1. The containment fields flickered, then stabilized with a subtle harmonic hum. Inside the containers, the angry green glow of the spores began to fade. Temperature dropping, Vex reported, tendrils unwinding slightly. Pressure stabilizing across all containers. Zathor's scales shifted to amazed gold as they studied the readings. The colony response is subsiding. They actually believe they're still connected. Sometimes the best way to solve a problem isn't to overpower it, Kira said, monitoring the stabilization progress. It's to work with the natural order instead of against it. A very human perspective, Captain Ixel observed, using understanding rather than force. We had to learn that lesson the hard way on Earth, Kira replied, thinking of all the failed attempts to combat invasive species through brute force. Every living thing has its own logic, its own patterns. The trick is figuring out how to speak their language. As the crisis subsided and the cleanup began, Kira noticed something odd in the cargo manifest. The spore's origin point didn't quite match the documented research station coordinates. Captain, she said quietly, I think we need to take a closer look at this shipment's documentation. Something doesn't add up. Captain Ixel's crystalline form dimmed slightly. You suspect deliberate sabotage. I don't know yet, Kira admitted. But in my experience, when biological samples start behaving unusually, it's rarely a coincidence. The captain nodded gravely. Investigate discreetly. If someone is weaponizing these spores, they'll have to get through us first, Kira finished, already planning how to adapt Earth's biosecurity protocols to this new threat. As she learned time and again, the principles of protection remain the same, whether on sea, land, or among the stars. The secure conference room aboard the Stellar Horizons hummed with tension as Kira presented her findings to the senior crew. The documentation inconsistencies aren't random, she explained, highlighting several manifest entries on the holographic display. Look at these shipping codes. They're perfect forgeries, except for one thing. They don't account for temporal drift. Captain Ixel's crystalline form pulsed with concern. Explain. On Earth, we discovered that smugglers often make perfect copies of shipping documents, but forget about seasonal variations. Kira expanded the display to show a timeline. These codes claim the samples came from the Rigel research station, but they don't show the standard temporal fluctuations we expect from that sector's gravitational distortions. Zathor's scales shifted to alarmed crimson. Which means they came from somewhere else entirely, Kira confirmed. I believe someone is using our cargo routes to transport illegal bioweapons research materials. The revelation sent ripples of concern through the assembled officers. Lieutenant Vex's tendrils coiled tightly. If those spores were weapons, then the colony behavior we witnessed might have been a test. Captain Ixel finished. The question is, was the test targeted at us specifically, or are we simply convenient carriers? Before anyone could respond, the ship's emergency alert system activated. Red warning lights bathed the conference room as the computer announced. Warning: multiple containment breaches detected. Biohazard protocols engaged. They're all activating, Vex reported, scanning the incoming data. Every suspicious container we flagged. They're synchronized. Kira's mind raced. This is no coincidence. Someone just triggered them remotely. She turned to Captain Ixel. Captain, request permission to implement Emergency Protocol Earth 7. Earth 7? Zathor questioned. I'm not familiar with this protocol. Because I just invented it, Kira admitted. Based on an old Earth technique for containing oil spills. Captain Ixel's crystalline form sparkled with decision. Explain quickly. In the 20th century, when oil tankers leaked, we learned that trying to contain the entire spill often failed. Instead, we had better success breaking it into smaller, manageable sections. Kira pulled up the ship's schematics. We can use the emergency bulkheads to isolate sections of the cargo hold, then deal with each breach individually. But the spores are clearly synchronized, Vex objected. Separating them might trigger an even worse reaction. That's exactly what we'll use against them, Kira said, highlighting key points in the cargo holds. We'll create a cascading isolation sequence, using their own synchronization to draw them into predictable patterns, like herding sheep into smaller and smaller pens. Zathor's scales flickered with understanding. The same principle we used to calm them before. But in reverse, Kira nodded. Instead of making them think they're connected, we'll use their attempt to connect to guide them where we want them. Captain Ixel studied the proposal for a brief moment. Do it. But Kira, if this fails. I know, she said grimly. We'll have concentrated the threat instead of containing it. The next hour was a carefully choreographed dance of emergency procedures. Kira coordinated with teams throughout the ship, timing the bulkhead activations to create a complex pattern of isolation zones. Each time the spores tried to synchronize across sections, they were cut off, forcing them to redirect their energy in predictable ways. It's working, Vex reported, their tendrils swaying with cautious optimism. The spores are consolidating into the designated containment zones. But just as success seemed within reach, a new alert sounded. Power fluctuation in Section 12. Zathor announced, their scales pulsing with alarm. The containment fields are failing. Kira studied the readings, her heart racing. The spores had adapted faster than expected, learning to draw power from the ship's systems to strengthen their connections. It was exactly the kind of evolutionary leap she feared they were capable of. We need to change tactics, she declared. They're not just colonizing anymore. They're evolving, using our own power against us. A memory from Earth's history sparked in her mind, like kudzu vines in the American South. Like what? Vex asked. An invasive plant species that adapted to use human infrastructure to spread faster. Kira explained quickly. We couldn't beat it with force, but we could trick it into overextending itself. She rushed to the power distribution controls. Captain, I need authorization to initiate a controlled power surge through the affected sections. You want to give them more power? Zathor's scales rippled with disbelief. No, Kira smiled grimly. I want them to think they're getting more power. When they try to absorb it all at once, they'll overload, Captain Ixel finished, crystalline form gleaming with approval. Do it. The next few minutes were tense as Kira carefully manipulated the power systems, creating the illusion of a massive energy surge while actually preparing to cut power entirely. The spores, sensing what seemed to be an unlimited power source, began to draw more and more energy. "Now," Kira shouted, cutting all power to the affected sections. The sudden absence of energy caught the spores mid-transformation, disrupting their attempted evolution and causing them to revert to their basic form. Containment restored. Vex announced, tendrils finally relaxing. All specimens are inert. The relief in the control room was palpable, but Kira wasn't finished. "Zathor, help me check these power consumption readings. They might tell us exactly what these spores were designed to do. And who designed them." As they began their analysis, Captain Ixel approached Kira. "Once again, your human perspective has proved invaluable. Though I suspect our troubles aren't over." "No," Kira agreed, studying the data patterns scrolling across her screen. "Someone went to a lot of trouble to test these weapons. They won't give up easily." She was right. Hidden in the power fluctuation data was a pattern she recognized, a signature that suggested this incident was just the beginning of a much larger threat, one that would require all of humanity's accumulated wisdom to combat. 3 days after the spore incident, Kira stood before the Galactic Transport Consortium's emergency session, her evidence carefully organized. The massive virtual chamber held representatives from 50 different species, all watching with varying degrees of concern and skepticism. "The power consumption data tells us everything," Kira explained, projecting a complex series of patterns into the shared virtual space. "These aren't just weapons. They're probes designed to test our cargo security protocols across multiple ships." "Preposterous," declared Delegate Murthan of the Centaurian Alliance. "No one could coordinate such a vast conspiracy." "Actually," Kira countered, "humanity discovered something similar during Earth's Second World War. Seemingly random shipping accidents turned out to be carefully orchestrated tests of naval defense systems." She manipulated the display, showing similar patterns from multiple ships across different sectors. The same signature appears in power fluctuations on at least 12 other vessels, all carrying supposedly legitimate cargo from different sources. Captain Ixel's crystalline form shimmered as they added, "Kira Jensen's analysis has been confirmed by our best systems. Someone is using our shipping lanes to perfect a new form of biological weapon." The chamber erupted in concerned murmurs. Kira pressed on, highlighting specific data points. But they made a crucial mistake, one that humans learned to look for centuries ago. They were too perfect in hiding their tracks. She zoomed in on the shipping manifests. Real cargo shows variations, tiny inconsistencies caused by everything from staff changes to local customs to simple human or alien error. These documents don't have any of that. They're too clean, too precise. Like someone worked from a template without understanding the organic nature of actual shipping operations. And you believe you know who's responsible. The consortium chief director leaned forward, their multifaceted eyes focusing intently on Kira. "Yes," she said firmly. "By analyzing the pattern of ships targeted and the sophistication of the forgeries, we've narrowed it down to someone with high-level access to multiple shipping authorities." She paused, bringing up one final piece of evidence. Someone like Underdirector Vran of the Outer Rim Transport Division. The chamber exploded into chaos as the named official, a tall, serpentine figure similar to Zathor, but with midnight black scales, rose from their seat. "This is absurd," Vran hissed. "You dare accuse me based on the primitive pattern matching of a level 3 species?" "No," Kira replied calmly. "I accuse you based on evidence that spans both space and time. Your operation mirrors historical patterns that humanity has seen repeatedly, from smuggling operations in ancient China to modern corporate espionage." She brought up a new display, showing the correlation between Vran's inspection schedules and the appearance of suspicious cargo. "You used your position to orchestrate inspections, ensuring your test shipments would pass through specific checkpoints at specific times. It's the same pattern used by corrupt officials in Earth's history, just on a galactic scale. Vran's scales shifted through multiple colors before settling on a deep, angry red. You cannot prove any of this. Actually, Zathor spoke up, their scales gleaming with satisfaction. We can. Once we knew what to look for, we found the quantum signatures of your communications with the research facilities producing the weapons. You used the same frequencies the spores used to communicate. Another pattern Kira taught us to recognize. Faced with mounting evidence, Vran attempted to flee, only to find their exit blocked by consortium security forces. As they were led away, the chief director turned to Kira. Ms. Jensen, your unique perspective has uncovered a threat that our most advanced systems missed. Perhaps it's time we reevaluated our assumptions about technological advancement versus experiential knowledge. Thank you, Director, Kira replied. But the real lesson here isn't about human superiority or inferiority. It's about the value of diverse perspectives. Humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or even our problem-solving ability. It's our capacity to learn from history and adapt those lessons to new situations. In the days that followed, the consortium implemented new cargo security protocols, many based on historical Earth practices adapted for space travel. Kira worked closely with Zathor and other alien cargo masters, combining their advanced technology with time-tested human methods. You know, Zathor said as they reviewed the new procedures, their scales showing the gold of deep respect. When you first came aboard, many thought having a human cargo specialist was a political gesture, a way to make your species feel included. Kira smiled, remembering her own initial nervousness. And now? Now we understand that true advancement doesn't always mean looking forward. Sometimes the best way to solve future problems is to understand past solutions. Their scales rippled thoughtfully. Your species may be young by galactic standards, but you carry within you the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who faced and overcame challenges we never imagined. That's humanity's real gift to the galaxy, Kira agreed, watching ships from across the cosmos dock at the station. Not our technology or our abilities, but our experience, our successes and failures, our experiments and discoveries, our entire history of learning to solve problems in creative ways. As she turned back to her work, Kira noticed an unusual pattern in the latest shipping manifests, something that reminded her of the old Panama Canal scheduling systems. She smiled, knowing that somewhere in humanity's past lay the seeds of another solution to this new galactic puzzle. After all, the more things changed across space and time, the more the fundamental patterns remained the same. And as humanity's first cargo specialist in the stars, she was uniquely positioned to help bridge the gap between Earth's ancient wisdom and the galaxy's endless future.